Imagine looking in the mirror and being completely convinced that the person looking back at you isn't alive. Not sad, not depressed in the way we usually think of it. Genuinely, calmly convinced that you have died, that your organs have stopped working, that you no longer exist, even while standing right there, breathing, talking, thinking. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, but this is a real documented psychiatric condition. It's called Cotard's delusion, sometimes known as walking corpse syndrome. And the people who experience it aren't confused about small details. They are certain, in a way that's almost impossible to argue them out of, that they are dead. So how does a working, thinking, breathing brain arrive at a conclusion that extreme? The answer involves a strange short circuit between two of the most important systems in your brain. And once you understand it, this bizarre condition starts to make an unsettling kind of sense. In 1880, a French neurologist named Jules Cotard described a patient he simply called Mademoiselle X. She insisted she had no brain, no nerves, no chest, no stomach. She believed she was eternal, unable to die a natural death, and that she didn't need to eat, because in her mind, she was already gone. Cotard didn't fully understand what caused it, but he had identified something real, a condition now studied by neurologists and psychiatrists around the world. Since then, dozens of documented cases have followed the same eerie pattern. Patients who insist their blood has stopped flowing. Patients who believe they're rotting, even while showing no signs of it. Patients who stop eating entirely, convinced that a dead body has no need for food. Here's the important distinction. This isn't someone who is scared of dying. It's not someone who feels emotionally dead inside, the way people sometimes describe depression. Those are metaphors. Cotard's delusion is literal. The person is not speaking in metaphor when they say, "I am dead." They mean it exactly the way it sounds, as a fact about their physical body, stated as plainly as you'd say your own name. And this is where it gets genuinely strange from a brain science perspective, because on paper, believing you're dead should be one of the easiest beliefs in the world to disprove. You're talking, you're breathing, your heart is beating enough to keep you conscious. So why can't the brain simply connect those dots? To understand Cotard's delusion, we need to understand something surprising about how your brain recognizes faces, including your own. There are actually two separate pathways in your brain that activate when you see a familiar face. The first pathway handles simple recognition. It looks at a face and says, "I know this face. This is my mother, this is my friend, this is me." The second pathway is completely different. It handles the emotional response that's supposed to come attached to that recognition. A small automatic warmth, a sense of familiarity, a feeling that says, "And this recognition matters, it feels real." Normally, these two pathways fire together, instantly, seamlessly. You see your own reflection, and both "that's me" and "that feels real" arrive at the same time, fused into one smooth experience. In certain rare cases, often involving brain injury, severe depression, or specific neurological damage, that second pathway can stop firing correctly. The recognition pathway still works fine. You still see your reflection and identify it as your own face. But the emotional "this feels real" signal that's supposed to come with it simply doesn't arrive. Imagine looking at your own hand and knowing factually that it's yours, but feeling absolutely nothing that confirms it. No warmth, no sense of ownership, no felt aliveness. For most people, this exact disconnect is actually the basis of a different, related condition called Capgras delusion, where someone becomes convinced that a loved one has been replaced by an imposter because the face looks right, but the emotional "this is really them" feeling is missing. Here's where Cotard's delusion takes a stranger turn. When this same emotional disconnect happens with a person's own face and own body, instead of someone else's, the brain is faced with an impossible contradiction. This is my face, but nothing about it feels real or alive. For a person with Capgras, the brain resolves that contradiction by rejecting the other person as fake. But you can't reject your own existence as an imposter standing in for me. So instead, in an eerie, desperate act of logic, the brain reaches for the only explanation that fits the felt evidence. If nothing about me feels alive, then I must not be alive. It's not a wild, random delusion. From the brain's twisted internal logic, in that moment, it's almost the most rational conclusion available. Cotard's delusion is extremely rare, but it isn't random. It tends to show up alongside a specific handful of conditions. Severe clinical depression, particularly the kind involving psychotic features. Bipolar disorder during a severe depressive episode. Certain types of brain injury, especially damage affecting the areas responsible for that emotional recognition pathway we just talked about. Some neurological conditions, including certain forms of dementia and migraine with aura. It also tends to appear more often in older adults, and interestingly, in cultures where beliefs about death, the body, and the afterlife are already prominent themes, suggesting that existing beliefs may shape how the delusion gets expressed, even if the underlying brain mechanism is universal. This isn't just a strange belief that stays quietly in someone's head, because patients are often convinced their body doesn't need anything anymore. Some stop eating, some stop drinking water, some stop seeking medical treatment for real, unrelated health problems, because why treat a body that's already dead? In the most severe documented cases, patients have starved themselves nearly to death, entirely convinced that doing so was medically irrelevant. This is part of why Cotard's delusion, despite being rare, is taken extremely seriously by psychiatrists. It can become a genuine medical emergency, hiding behind what sounds like an abstract, almost philosophical belief. This isn't just theoretical. In 2008, doctors published a detailed case study of a woman in her 50s who was rushed to a hospital in the Philippines, insisting she needed to be taken to a morgue because, in her words, she had already died and simply wanted to be with the other dead people. She showed no fever, no infection, nothing physically wrong, just an unshakable, calm certainty that she belonged among corpses. In another widely studied case from 1996, a young man in Scotland suffered a severe head injury in a motorcycle accident. After recovering physically, he became convinced he had died in the crash, and that his mother had somehow taken his body to a hot climate because, as he put it, his body simply wasn't decomposing the way a dead body should. He wasn't being poetic. He wanted an explanation for why his corpse hadn't started to rot yet. These aren't rare exaggerations passed around online. They're published, peer-reviewed medical cases, real people sitting across from real doctors, calmly explaining, in complete detail, why they were certain they no longer existed. Given how disconnected the belief is from reality, you might expect treatment to be nearly impossible. But it's more treatable than it sounds. Because Cotard's delusion is so often tied to severe depression, treating the underlying depression through antidepressant medication, antipsychotic medication, or in more severe and treatment-resistant cases, electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, frequently resolves the delusion entirely. In multiple documented cases, patients who spent months insisting they were dead have gone on to fully recover, later describing the experience with a kind of bewildered clarity, genuinely unable to explain, in hindsight, how they had believed something so at odds with the obvious evidence in front of them. This detail matters because it tells us something important. The delusion isn't a permanent break from logic. It's a temporary, correctable short circuit, one specific wire crossed in an otherwise intact and reasoning brain. Here's what made these real cases so difficult for doctors at first. You'd think the fix would be simple. Just show the person clear evidence, check their pulse in front of them, show them a mirror, point out their speaking, breathing, responding. But logic doesn't work the way we'd expect here. Remember, the problem was never a lack of information. The recognition pathway was working fine. These patients could see the pulse, hear their own voice, watch their chest rise and fall. The missing piece was the feeling that made any of that evidence matter. So doctors showing more facts to a brain that had lost its ability to feel those facts as real was a bit like trying to fix a broken speaker by talking louder into it. The information was getting there. It just wasn't landing anywhere. This is exactly why treating the underlying depression or brain injury, rather than trying to argue the delusion away, was what actually worked in most documented recoveries. You can't out-argue a feeling that's missing. You have to help the brain rebuild it. Here's what makes Cotard's delusion so strange and so worth understanding, even if you'll never experience it yourself. It reveals a hidden layer of your own mind that you almost never think about. Right now, as you watch this, some quiet, automatic part of your brain is constantly confirming, this is real, I am here, this is happening. You've never had to consciously verify that feeling. It's simply always been there, running underneath every single moment of your life, so seamlessly that it's invisible. The same way you don't consciously notice your breathing until someone points it out. Cotard's delusion is essentially what happens when that invisible confirmation signal gets switched off. And the fact that losing it can convince an otherwise intelligent, reasoning person that they've died tells you just how much of your sense of being real is actually being generated by your brain, moment to moment, rather than being some obvious, self-evident fact. This connects to something bigger. So much of what feels like solid, undeniable reality, your sense of self, your sense of aliveness, even your sense of time passing normally, is being actively constructed by your brain in the background. Most of the time, that construction works so well, so consistently, that it feels like it isn't happening at all. It just feels like reality. But conditions like Cotard's delusion offer a rare, unsettling glimpse behind the curtain, showing that feeling alive isn't a passive fact about your body. It's an active, ongoing process. And when one small piece of that process misfires, even something as fundamental as knowing you exist can come apart. Why do some people believe they're already dead? Because deep in the brain, recognition and feeling are supposed to travel together. And when that connection breaks, the mind reaches for the only explanation that fits what it's left feeling. Nothing at all. It's one of the rarest, strangest conditions in psychiatry. But it leaves us with something oddly grounding. The next time you catch your own reflection, and it just feels like you, that's not nothing. That quiet, automatic sense of being real and present is doing more work than you'll ever consciously notice. And for the vast majority of us, every single day, it simply quietly works.